Hello there everyone! Last week I talked about the Imperial Navy and the Adeptus Mechanicus and how they were translated from the tabletop version into potentially what they're going to be like in Armada 2 when it is finally released. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the Space Marines and the Chaos Forces, for I'm really excited about the possibility these two factions can bring, because the sad fact is there's not a lot of new ship designs to look forward to, but there are a lot of special rules that never made it into Armada 1, and I'm really excited for the possibilities or how they may even be implemented into Armada 2. And with Space Marines possibly getting new technology, I'm going to explain a little bit on the new stuff they got as far as the tabletop, the Warhammer 40k version, what new land vehicles and that they got, and how that possibly could translate over into like a brand new type of Navy vessel for the Space Marines that really has me excited there. But first, I want to clarify a few things that I may have neglected to talk about in my last video that may be pretty important, because I did gloss over it as one of the Mechanicus traits, but I never did clarify what it actually meant, and that's the turn count on the right of this battle barge here you're looking at. Those are actually the number of point defense you have available to you for the purposes, of course, of shooting down fighters, shooting down bombers, and shooting down torpedoes that may be coming your way. And there is an interesting dynamic they did in the tabletop version, whereas if you shoot at torpedoes or the fighters there first, then you are not allowed to shoot at the opposite type of ordnance that are coming at you there. So technically, if you shoot at one single squadron of fighters, you were forbidden to shoot at torpedoes, which introduced an interesting type of strategy that allowed you to overwhelm a target with heavy torpedo fighters while sacrificing maybe a small count of bombers or fighters just to throw away its defenses and mitigating a lot of that damage there. And also, it's important to note that the bombers and torpedoes didn't really breach through armor. At least I'm gonna have to double check on that to be sure though. So yes, the torpedoes do not mitigate or pierce through the armor of the ships there, but the bombers, interestingly enough, automatically attack the weakest portion of a ship there, so they are not quite as effective as they are in Armada 1 without a doubt, but there were a lot of other different rules regarding the torpedoes. For one, they were a much tighter arc as opposed to the spread that they currently have in Armada 1, so it's a little bit understandable why they were buffed up as a result, never mind the real-time aspect of it, where you can immediately respond to torpedoes as opposed to tabletop. That allows you to basically get in point-blank range and basically guarantee a hit on the ship there with your torpedoes. So there are some nuances to it there. But otherwise, this Space Marine battle barge is exactly as you know it there. The only minor difference I'm going to point out is that with the strike cruiser, the bombardment cannons do a strength of 3 there, so it's not quite a true translation as like 3 bombardment cannons versus the single one of the strike cruiser, but it's really damn close there. And it has a lot of broadside weaponry, while only slightly less potent than the Imperial Navy. Considering the fact that these Space Marine ships were designed more for troop transports and invasion of planets, these things are fearsome beasts without a doubt. Now, a very interesting thing you may not know about the Space Marines is that they quite literally only have 2 cruisers available to them. That's right, I said 2. We have the strike cruiser and the battle barge here as far as the official tabletop rule, and the Vanguard is Tyndallos' own creation there for the purposes, of course, of not leaving the Space Marines in the dust there as far as like building up our level 1 fleet. It may get a little bit awkward, but it would have been interesting to start off with a strike cruiser as well. And it remains to be seen. Well, I haven't really paid attention to the feedback regarding the Vanguard, but it was personally one of my favorite ships there. It may be a little bit awkward because of the broadside weaponry were not really potent, let alone having to get through shields, mind you. Especially with the strategy I implemented, which was the torpedo variant, but it's Tyndallos' very own creation, and it's just a taste of what possibly can be presented for more, at least traditional type of Space Marine type of ships. But with the story arc involving the Primaris Marines, Guilliman's return, and the special weaponry meant for the Primaris Marines, I would absolutely love to see what a Space Marine cruiser would look like if it was meant strictly for war and not so much troop transports. Because a lot of the reason was the Imperium was afraid of giving the Space Marines pure warships there, which is why they were given the transport vessels they have. And we've already seen on the stats there how mobile these are. The strike cruiser alone is going to 225 speed. With the 25, well, actually it's 188, I forgot. It's the Vanguards that goes 30 centimeters if it was into the tabletop version, but we see every single one of these ships are faster than their normal counterparts because, well, the battle barge is the same speed technically as a Retribution net, but I feel like with how heavily armored it is, how heavily armed it would be, I could definitely see it if it was an Imperial Navy ship going the same speed as, say, like an Emperor without a doubt, or the Apocalypse class battleship at that. But another thing I need to clarify there that I kind of overlooked because I really didn't notice it at first was the fire arcs in comparison to the wording on the weaponry, the armament itself there. So, prow bombardment cannon, I assumed it meant like front arc attacking weapons, so there was like a couple of the Imperial Navy fleets that actually have 270-degree fire arcs as a result, even though technically it's the way it's worded is that it's strictly a prow weapon. So I got a little bit confused there because the Defiant, one of the new light cruisers we might be getting, it was actually had 2 turrets on top of it, even though the wording suggested otherwise. And also, it just came to me a moment ago, I was aware of this earlier, but I forgot to bring this up, is actually the cost of the strike cruiser. This is one of those few ships where the tabletop version actually has the strike cruiser as being cheaper than its Armada 1 version. And just to let you know, this is the only variant of the strike cruiser that I'm aware of, with the Thunderhawks as opposed to Torpedoes or the Prow Lances, so there may be options for customization here, and mentions it on the text down below regarding the the Grey Knights type of strike cruisers, but this is the only variant that you're able to feel as far as the basic rules at least, and the fact that it's actually, 10 points cheaper to the Armada 1 variant is kind of interesting, because everything else besides maybe the frigates are actually more expensive than the RTS counterparts. But even with the limited roster of the Space Marines, they still have their full plethora of frigates available to them. So we still have the Gladius, we still have the Nova, we have the Hunter as well. They are all in. Another thing I forgot to mention was the fact that almost all these frigates only have 1 hit point there. And if they ever suffer a critical hit, that immediately destroys them as a result. Because it's true to how Armada 1 plays, they can't have their components get destroyed. So any boarding, any critical hits would immediately kill them if it were to break through its defenses for whatever reason. But you can see the 30 centimeter speed. This is, aside for the Hellbringers, this is like the first ship that we've seen that goes 225 speed. On top of the fact that the Nova and Hunter go even faster than that with the 35 centimeters, which would be, 250, 280? I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but it's notably faster without a doubt. And let's not forget our first true original type of ship there, which is the Vanguard. This is a different design, I suppose, because it has the Thunderhawks on all its ships, at least for the Mark 1 variant, as well as the torpedo combo. Whereas only the battle barge really has a potent number of torpedoes, aside for the Hunter, the strike cruiser never had access to torpedoes, at least on what we saw in the stats sheet, so having something that can be accessible with a large number of torpedoes was definitely a different idea for what the Space Marines currently are utilizing, but it remains to be seen how they fared. I never really paid attention to the feedback on the Vanguard, but it was definitely one of my favorites in terms of its mobility on top of its resilience. The fact that it has 400 health, mind you, made it very susceptible to a lot of armor-piercing weaponry. And one important factor that could have changed how Space Marines performed in the multiplayer, and just in Armada 1 in general, is the fact that their shields also benefit from their armor. This is an important fact without a doubt, because it means that your ships are so much more resilient, your shields regenerate basically every turn, provided your movement is smart there, because how they kept track of shield damage is quite significantly different to how you would assume normally, with it just recharging every turn. You had to avoid like dangerous terrain markers for it to recharge the shields, because they were basically your trackers there. They also served as like dangerous terrain. They're called blast markers as far as any of the wording you may have seen here on the text, but they were how you kept track of shield damage, whereas you just kept track of the armor damage, your health damage normally there otherwise. And this fact would have made a big difference for Space Marines, well, not so much for like Imperial Navy or fighting anything that didn't rely heavily on armor-piercing weaponry, considering like the Strike Cruiser and the Vanguard still would only have like 1 point of health shield, mind you. But still, even then, like minimizing, still having some kind of armor resistance on your ships there without having to invest an upgrade on it, still would have made a big difference for them, considering it is still regenerating health after all. And normally, the Space Marine fleets were intended to kind of complement an Imperial Navy fleet, but it's entirely possible you can just go with the Strike Cruisers and Battle Barges without a doubt to kind of be the mainstay of your fleet. You didn't need to field any Mechanicus, you didn't need to field any Imperial Navy, but their options were definitely limited, so it encouraged the diversity by giving them those options to have the Retribution, the regular type of cruisers kind of to complement and support them. Which is why I'm so excited for the potential Space Marines as we move into Armada 2, because after all, the new weaponry their Space Marine troopers actually have to utilize there. I'm not quite sure on the specific lore and weaponry themselves. I haven't really had a chance to read up on the new rules, mind you, but these tanks are looking impressive there. They look highly advanced, still contributing the same kind of design that the Imperium has been using all the time, except for, what is it? The Astartes super heavy tank there, I forget what it's called. I think it's just a super heavy tank, mind you. Oh, I'm sorry, there is like the Astraeus super heavy tank. I was calling it Astartes heavy tank for whatever reason, because that's what the Space Marines technically are called, the Adeptus Astartes. But this tank alone has me super excited for what a true warship would be meant for the Space Marines, because this is, as it sounds, this is a weapon of war. It's not like a land raider that's meant to transport Terminators or an elite Space Marine squad into melee range to kind of assault their enemy. No, this thing's meant to kill things. And it's not armed by the Imperial Navy this time around like the Baneblade or the the Titans of War. This is truly meant for Space Marines. It is a brand new type of iteration that came into play, like, I don't even know when it was officially released, but the rules for the new Space Marines, the Primaris Marines, was basically last year, so it's very recent without a doubt. And it's things like this in the Repulsor tank, which is more of a transport ship, mind you, but still, it has the new weaponry and the new design as well to kind of support the Primaris Marines into battle. And it still remains to be seen how the Primaris Marines alone are going to affect a naval ship, because they are basically just better Space Marines, so it seems a little bit lackluster to just have them be better at boarding, better at troop value, mind you, but there is still possibilities there that I'm interested to see how creative Tindalos gets with the Space Marines. And speaking of getting creative, that is exactly the potential that Chaos can also bring to bear. Mind you, their ships are pretty much as we see them already, but they have some ridiculous customization rules that also bring some exciting factors into Armada 2, if they implement it, and implement it properly. I don't think I need to talk too terribly much about the Chaos ships in general there, because we already have a good idea what they are, and I put enough time in the last episode to at least give you an understanding of their stats there, so it is pretty similar in this fact that the spoiler is going to 150 centimeters speed, the unit speed there, as you can see, the 20 centimeters, everything else basically is 25 centimeters or higher, for the purposes of what you're seeing here. But there are some customization options still available, like the spoiler could have torpedoes fitted on the prow, and it doesn't even sacrifice any of your bombers at that, it just sacrifices the prow lance, which changes the diversity of the potency of the spoiler quite heavily, especially since most players in multiplayer at least use this thing as sort of like a meat shield to kind of draw fire, especially with the Nurgle favor on top of it. So the Prow Lance didn't really complement that role very well, so if you could just get massive burst damage on top of not sacrificing your bombers, this thing could be really damn fearsome in close, at least short term. But that was only the real big possible change that I noticed, aside for maybe like the Acheron itself, but that's kind of like a minor thing that is interesting to be aware of, at least with how they do it. But this Desolator, the Slaughter, all those other ones basically are true as they are, even with the Slaughter speed boost there, because the all-ahead full is basically our current speed boost, and it gets an increase in its mobility as well whenever it triggers that special order. But the Acheron, at least, it didn't have its true 12,000 unit range on all of its lances there, surprisingly. It was really the the turrets that were actually 9,000 unit range, surprisingly, so it would not have its potency at max distance like it would in Armada 1 currently, so I wonder how that would have changed the dynamic for the Acheron. It is a minor thing, mind you, because you can easily enhance the range to get everything back up to at least 12,000 unit range, but still, it is something that is to think about, how that would have changed the Acheron's performance. And I already briefly mentioned the slaughter there, and here it is in person for you to look at. Everything is as you would expect there. The extra speed, the health as usual, including 6,000 range on pretty much everything there. Hell, I mentioned already, ready to all ahead full special order. That's basically, like I said, the speed boost there, and it just improves it so you basically get to roll more dice to determine how far it gets to go. Additionally, of course, the one main downside with all these orders is, like I said last episode, they do hinder either your firepower or your mobility in some form. So it's not as big a translation or true a translation as it was in Armada 1. You still had to sacrifice power, durability to get this extra, get this more specific result. And of course you had to do your leadership role, which since we didn't have mutinies in the tabletop version, you had to use your leadership and morale to basically execute the orders effectively. But the one big thing Chaos brought to Armada 1 was how unique it seemed like their upgrades, their favors were, at least visually if nothing else, for they were able to influence the chance of insubordination. They had Nurgle, which basically gave an extra weapon at point blank range that ignored armor completely, and of course we had the gas to generate your own gas cloud to kind of like serve as an AoE salt running for the entirety of your fleet. So their abilities were incredibly potent, and a lot of it was kind of inspired by the favors you're seeing here on their upgrade options there. We have all the marks for the ships there. Most of them can be understandable how they translate into Armada 1, like Slaanesh there reduced the leadership value, which is, you may not be aware of how Slaanesh works. Sure, it has the means to just negate your abilities completely, but the other effect it had was to increase your chance of insubordination the more ships that were within at least 6,000 unit range. For the Mark of Slaanesh in the tabletop version, it was actually 3,000 units, or 15 centimeters as it says here. But it was still the same kind of effect, and even Khorne was kind of true to its boarding potential. It just didn't have any bonuses to it like its lightning strike, as what you would see in the wording here would be called a hit and run. Hit and run is basically anything that would only do temporary damage, so that's like boarding torpedoes and lightning strikes, for example. The Mark of Siege is like the only one that was completely reworked, because a reroll was basically just allows you to re-roll a leadership roll for your orders, and not so much what it is now that allows you to literally teleport your ships across space if you weren't detected. And they sure as hell didn't have a gas cloud that they could make things more difficult to hit. But Nurgle is like perhaps the most unique one out of all the tabletop game so far, because it literally gives you an extra health point. It makes you impossible to board, which is where the troop value came in, the troop value boost you got for the favor, but it literally gained you health instead of doing damage to your opponents, so that is a drastic difference there, and it would have been amusing, it would have been interesting to see how that changed, how that actually would have made Nurgle in general. But we haven't had a look at the Grand Cruisers just yet there, and to be honest, it's kind of like they are a little bit underwhelming, I'm not gonna lie, for Chaos, because they're almost quite literally a one-to-one translation of what you saw in the Imperial Navy. They go by different names, slightly different loadouts mind you, but they are still more or less the same as what we already saw there. There's like 3 Grand Cruisers available to them. We have the Executor Grand Cruiser here, which is more like a hybrid with lances and macro batteries there for like 6,000, 9,000 unit range, with the same health points and speed as the Grand Cruisers, so I feel like these ships may be more of a liability in comparison to the Imperial Navy version, but hey, if the Grand Cruisers ever make an Armada 2, they can easily rework that, as we've seen with some of the tweaks they have, and when I talk about Eldar, we're going to see more about how drastically they can change ships there. We also have the Repulsive and the Retaliator Grand Cruisers there, and while so far the Executor and the Retaliator have been very similar design to the Imperial Navy Grand Cruisers, the Repulsive at least looks drastically different and actually looks like a true Chaos ship there. It even has torpedoes available to it, so if for whatever reason you wanted a lot of torpedoes for your Chaos fleet, there are now a couple options there, potentially, for at least your Grand Cruisers and your battleships. because as we found out, as I showed you earlier, even this Desolator could have like torpedoes on his prow for some really vicious in-close fighting potential. But I think the one big thing I am super excited about potentially is the aspect of demon ships. This is basically additional rules you could put onto the ship there at additional cost. They didn't really enhance your ship in combat there, but how they function is so dramatically different there, as it allows you to kind of like warp in a ship anywhere on the map there. They did restrict it quite heavily for a tabletop version, but just the possibility of having demon ships in play, these warp monstrosity of ships there that basically been possessed by demons, or at least a gigantic powerful demon there, is a very exciting aspect and just an amazing aspect of Chaos in general. Never mind the amazing amount of customization options you had in the tabletop version for the original Warhammer 40k, with what Chaos had already. Just giving him demon weapons, upgrading him to like a demon prince, a big giant monstrous demon for your Chaos army and all that good stuff. There was a ridiculous amount of customization options, it felt like, for Chaos. And the possibilities continue with Armada, with Battlefleet Gothic in general. For how these demon ships worked in general is, like I said, they phase in at battle. You can choose to field them as normal, but you're not really getting any bonuses there, and it's just costing you extra points, so that's entirely out of the not the point of having a demon ship in general. But after the first turn there, you could choose to phase in a demon ship there within 20 centimeters of a target, anywhere at all basically, within 20, at least no further or no closer than 20 centimeters of your target. You did roll a scatter dice to see if it landed at the point you wanted it, or it may scatter to a random direction, but ideally you put it into play and it actually has an immediate effect to the leadership of all ships around it. It could not be attacked, mind you, but it could not be attacked either, which is where I would talk about it being heavily restricted in its practicality in the tabletop version. But after a certain duration, you could choose to make it materialize and be able to fight as normal, but it requires you to give your opponent basically a free turn, because you couldn't fire at it or you can't shoot immediately with it. It had to be something you chose to do at the end of the turn, which goes a lot with what I said already, but just this aspect, this dynamic is amazing. It excites me heavily, even more so because you could choose to disengage with the ship immediately, or at least at any point there, and as you can see in the rules there, it actually allows you the option of regenerating your health as the fight progresses, which, considering Chaos are all about long-range fighting there, trying to avoid direct confrontation, I see a lot of value with this being in like a Slaughter, a Desolator, or anything basically that's more encouraged to getting close. If you can abuse the mechanics a little bit, it may be potentially overpowered if it's not restricted, mind you, like it is in the tabletop version, but I love this aspect and I hope it makes it into Armada 2 in some form at least. Ideally though, I would love it if it was more of an original type of ship there rather than being like an upgrade or variation of the ships that are currently in Armada 1. Because that would make it even more exciting. It has a lot more potential, and it makes it, of course, easier for them to balance because it's much more specific, much more direct. It allows them to make it exactly what they want, so that way they don't have to worry about all these other variations that they may have overlooked there. And there are a lot of examples of this already in the Warhammer 40k version with the Demon engines. We have a handful of Demon engines from the original Soul Grinder to all the new, more recent iterations or additions like the Helldrake and the Forge Fiend. These are good examples of what we could possibly expect as far as a living demon ship there. So much exciting stuff there. I don't want to get you too hyped for the possibility for it, especially if you're a Chaos fan there, because it may be a little bit daunting for Tindalos to do it effectively, do it right without it being ridiculously overpowered, but the option is there, the inspiration is there, and I hope fully that Tindalos are at least thinking about it and trying to put it into Armada 2. They could, of course, just make them a regular old ship there, but where's the fun in that, seriously? Now, one final thing I want to talk about before ending off on Space Marines and Chaos is, of course, the possible Titanic ships we may have to look forward to, because there were some things I was not even aware of. For one, the McCragg's Honor there, the flagship of Guilliman, was actually his original ship before the Horus Heresy. It is a Gloriana class battleship there, and there was one of these for every single one of the founding legions that each of the Primarchs had access to, as basically their flagship there, so there is possibly more of these there, and even the Chaos could have access to them as well, even though most of their Primarchs are long gone as well. But there is also the Abyss class battleship, and I actually read the book that involved one of these things. The Furious Abyss. These ships were meant to surpass the Gloriana type of battleships there that I already mentioned, but the Furious Abyss itself was supposed to go after the Ultramarines' homeworld of Macragge there. It was supposed to do a surprise attack during the Horus Heresies, and thankfully, somehow, it was as far as the book suggests, it was destroyed before actually getting the Macragge from a handful of Space Marines that conveniently found out about this attack. And from what I understand, there were a total of 3 of these ships built. At least I only know of the Furious Abyss that was destroyed there, but there were 2 other ones, the Blessed Lady and the Trisagion. I don't know if their names are going to get changed, especially with the Blessed Lady, mind you, but I don't think it was ever confirmed anywhere in the lore that they were destroyed or found, so those things are still possibly wandering out in the Eye of Terror somewhere, and they could make an appearance in Armada 2 as well. And let's not talk about the Phalanx, but they've been hyping that already for the Armada 2, especially in that conference show that they did like last month. So I don't think we need to worry too much about that, because they already demonstrated, we already got a vague idea what it is, but it's basically the Imperial Fist base of operations, and that thing is like, at least as it phrases, it is as big as like an Eldar craft world, and that's going to be something you can take control of. So this has me excited for the possibility of craft worlds being interactable, being something you can control, because the craft worlds in the tabletop version were just a mission objective. They kind of like served as a planetoid for all intents and purposes, so you didn't really get an option to field them all that much, or didn't really get to do anything with them in all honesty. But of course, that just unfortunately puts it pale in comparison to the Planet Killer, because that was in Armada 1 in all honesty there. It was probably just redesigned slightly or retuned with its Armageddon cannons for the purposes of the campaign, but that was actually a ship you can actually field in the tabletop version with its cannons, its torpedoes, its broadside weaponry, and you can even choose to make it like the priority target for most mission objectives. Hell, the Planet Killer was an actual objective. You got special rules if you so wish to have it as the main ship of target if you so wish. It was even written down there on one of the other pages. But it was a ship you can have access to. Unfortunately, in the lore, the text here, the original Planet Killer was actually destroyed, I guess, shortly after Abaddon's crusade in the Gothic sectors, so it's still always possible this thing could make a return. It could even be something you can build. Imagine having multiples of these for the Chaos campaign, if and when that ever makes it into Armada 2. But I was kind of hoping this episode would be a lot shorter, and clearly I'm really bad at doing that. But I am still really damn excited for the possibilities that Armada 2 can bring. It's still a question if Tindalos could deliver, but it's still exciting nonetheless, and next time, when I can get around to it, I plan on talking about all 3 of the Eldar factions there, and showing you what they have to bring. Thank you everyone for listening.